Greetings to you all. Hello, welcome everyone. I'm Subhanki Siva, International United Federation's International Executive Officer, and I'm pleased to be the moderator today for this event. I would like to start with thanking you all for joining this virtual conference for the elimination of violence against women to bring awareness. As someone once said, the show must go on. Not that this is a show, but I appreciate the effort to be together virtually. We are here truly as one to raise awareness and combat violence against women and children. We do our best when we do it together. So this is a good step in the right direction to raise awareness and to forge synergy between all of us for one common goal we all want to achieve. All of our special guests we joined to take part of this event, they all want to work toward the same mission with their own field of expertise. This conference is jointly launched by International United Women Federation, the Alliance Creative Community Project, United Nations ECOSOC accredited member organization. Who are we? International United Women Federation was created to bring awareness and promote women's rights and develop women throughout the world as leaders. International United Women Federation supports women and girls to live life free from all forms of violence, achieve gender equality, education, income security, and decent work. We closely work with UN Women and follow their guidance, use the education system to prevent the violence. International United Women Federation also works with other NGOs in their endeavors. It is to be noted, according to United Nations report, the statistics are clearly showing that more than 60% of women who experience violence do not seek help. As an effort to working toward these startling statistics, we set Stand Up, Speak Out as the theme for this event. International United Women Federation is working tirelessly to bring awareness through conferences, helping women to elimination violence and educate to get help. Also, International United Women Federation holds 6 world records and actively participated in multiple UN conferences. Our organization is globally expanding in many different countries, such as Sri Lanka, Pakistan, Germany, France, London, USA, and Latin America. To begin our conference without further ado, I would like to warmly invite Mrs. Raji Patterson, CEO, International United Women Federation. She is a humanitarian and a social activist. Raji Patterson is also a director of women empowerment of Alliance Creative Community Project, an ECOSOC accredited organization, United Nations. She is also an author, received multiple international awards, excellent Asian female social and human rights activist for women empowerment, rights, and welfare for 2021. Over to you, Mrs. Raji Patterson.
Thank you, Subangi. Greetings to our Honorable Member of Parliament, our distinguished guests, and all our attendees. On behalf of the International United Women Federation, I am honored to welcome you all. I thank you for your presence here and support in the success of this international conference. As our International Executive Officer Subangi Siva presented, we are bringing awareness through conferences and connecting with women around the world to eliminate violence against women. Many women do not want to speak out or recognize violence. How we can define violence? It can take both physical and emotional forms. Examples include name calling, hitting, pushing, blocking, stalking, criminal harassment, rape, sexual assault, control, and manipulation. Many forms of this violence are against the law. Anybody, no matter their background, identity, or circumstances, can be abused. But women, girls, and gender diverse people are at higher risk of gender-based violence. Violence against women and girls is a global issue. It remains one of the most persistent human rights violations and a threat to millions of girls and women. Violence against women and girls knows no social, economic, or national boundaries. It affects women for all ages, arises in various types of settings, and takes many forms, including physical, sexual, and psychological violence, as well as economic abuse and exploitation. No country in this world has succeeded eliminating gender-based violence yet. The World Economic Forum says that 6 women are killed every hour around the world by men, most often by men in their own family or their partners. The latest UN figures show that 137 women across the world are killed every day by a partner or member of their own family. A total of 50,000 women a year murdered by people they know and should be able to trust. One woman or girl is killed every 2 or 3 days in Canada. And sexual assault, one of the most underreported crimes in Canada, is also the only violent crime not on in decline. Studies from 2020 find that the violence against women in Canada is increasing. United Nations General Assembly had adopted Resolution 54/134, which officially designates the 25th of November as the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women. Women stand at the heart of communities. On International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women, the UN is calling on the nations to act together. We all have responsibility to stand together, bring awareness through a campaign ending this violence. All community leaders, teachers, politicians, and parents must unite together to eliminate violence against women, saving their lives, teaching gender equality, and setting themselves as an example. I cordially welcome all our distinguished guests who are attending this conference today. I very much appreciate your dedication and commitment to make this event successful. I also welcome all our attendees, media partners, and the audience who are watching live. I thank you for this opportunity and hope that we all will have a great time together. I'm handing over to Subhangi Siva, who is our moderator today. She is a social activist working closely with Elders Association as a coordinator. She has passion to empower women and contribute tremendously through her dedicated leadership and has received multiple awards. I thank you, Subhangi, for your commitment and inspiration to women. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you, Mrs. Patterson. Thank you so much. That's very nice of you. So I'm going to introduce our next speaker now. And it's a great pleasure to have her today with us, Mrs. Ellen Alam. She is our International United Women Federation's Ambassador of Pakistan. So it's a great honor to have her today. Ellen Alam is a development and human rights practitioner in Pakistan, working in the sector since 2007. Founder member and Secretary General Faces Pakistan. She has extensive experience in poverty education programs and community development in both policy and practice, and specializes in development management. Let us give a warm welcome to Mrs. Alam. Over to you now.
Thank you so much for the warm welcome, and I am very excited to be a part of not just the IUWF, but also this conference today, because it gives me a chance to speak about this issue, which is not only close to my heart, but close to us as a group, as the IUWF, as Subhangi and Mrs. Patterson very rightly introduced just in the beginning. And it brings me to an angle of a different context, as I would like to, with my talk right now, the 5 minutes that I have, I wanted to bring a little perspective and context coming from Pakistan, bringing a Pakistani perspective and bringing a Pakistani woman's perspective. And an additional layer to that, I would like to bring a Pakistani indigenous perspective as well. So as we know, we just introduced right in the beginning, the number of cases worldwide of gender-based violence have been increasing. And reportedly around the world, if a country like Canada, where there are safeguards, which is known to be ranked to be one of the safest cities in the world, countries in the world, there, if the situation is better there, the situation in Pakistan as a developing country, as a country of the South, is much more alarming. So we have around the statistics show that at least 10 cases of rape happen in one district or in one one area of our cities in Pakistan. So that is one thing that is very alarming. The other point that I wanted to bring forward is that the incidences of reporting are very, very low. So there are very low cases that are reported in Pakistan of violence against women. There are good laws where Pakistan is known to have some of the greatest number of laws in the country that protect women and that protect religious minorities, but the implementation of those laws is extremely weak. And that is one of the perspectives that is very important for the global south and for countries like Pakistan, where there might be a plethora of a lot of laws and legislations and legal frameworks that also follow the international framework, and are in line with the international framework. We have departments and human rights ministries, for example, that are bound to follow the international framework on the protection and the elimination of violence against women. But how those are being implemented is a big challenge in countries like Pakistan. Additional to that, I just wanted to bring in a layer of marginalization, which is that of indigenous women. And when I speak about indigenous women, I'm talking largely about religious minority women. I'm speaking about the Christian and the Hindu women, and other religious minority women that reside in Pakistan, and how that framework of international law, the framework of CEDAW, the frameworks, the other international covenants that Pakistan is signatory to and Pakistan has signed. The challenge is really high of how religious minority women are protected, precisely because we have other loopholes of legislations like the blasphemy laws and the new sort of trend and the rising cases of forced marriages and forced conversions, where young minor girls from religious minorities are being abducted, raped, and taken through a process of violence against women and abuse and sexual exploitation, and then converted forcefully to another religion. And of course, that doesn't just add to the issue of violence. It adds to the trauma, the life experience, and the cycle of violence that continues in a family of a religious minority woman's family. Like, her girls are affected, the young girls born into those families are affected, and that takes a toll for generations. And this is largely the perspective I wanted to bring, because I feel that this scenario that is rising in Pakistan against indigenous women, it is very similar when you hear of cases against minority women in India. And looking at this trend in the global south, especially now, if I talk about the subcontinent, India and Pakistan, this is a perspective that the international community is really not thinking about at the moment. And I barely see this being addressed at various forums, because either the issue is not highlighted enough, or the governments are not questioned enough on these kinds of issues. So yes, violence against women as we know it, as we see in reports, as is reported by international agencies, is very much there. But these layers of marginalization and violence against indigenous communities, I feel needs a bit of a boost. And that was the perspective that I wanted to bring in.
Thank you, Ms. Ellen Alam. Thank you so much for your input and share. Our next guest, it's with an honor, I may now introduce Mrs. Mary Droz, our City Councillor, Park Extension District. She is a woman from Montreal who has the deep love for Park Extension and her community. Since her election in 1998, she has been involved in her borough to give back beautiful image to her district by offering new libraries to young people and seniors, renovating all the parks with the addition of water games, as well as by allowing tree planting to combat urban heat island. Mrs. Mary Rose, it's a great honor to introduce you. Over to you, Mrs. Rose.
Thank you so much. Good morning to everyone participating today. I'd like to start off by saying bonjour, good morning, kalimera, pariluis, namaste, vanakkam, srat sri akal. I have a very large South Asian community living in Parkex, and over 115 different cultural communities. Over the last 23 years as city councillor, and prior to that, I was involved as a volunteer with the youth sector of Park Extension on their board of directors for soccer and many social programs. So it's a lot more than just 23 years working within the community, but I have seen so much. I have witnessed so much sadness and events, not only the sad events. I must say that we also have wonderful celebrations of the coming together of all the different cultures. But this past year, we had the 14th femicide in Park Extension, where the husband killed the mother, the wife, in front of his 3 children, and then he left, leaving the children with the mother who was dead on the floor. And we found out several days later that they found the body. He had committed suicide by jumping into a river. And that's just one of the numerous sad events that take place. Thank God we have organizations such as yours to stand up and speak out, to give support to women's organizations. In Park Extension, I can say that we have Africo Femina that work with the various women of different cultures, making them aware that they do have rights, that they can get out of abusive relationships. We also have the Shield of Athena, the Bouclier d'Athena, that gives incredible support to women and families of conjugal violence. And they also have an Athena home where they can take in the families, the women and their children, and give them hope, educate them, and eventually set them off to live a free and unafraid life. You know, when this organization first came into being, the community, the Greek community, was insulted, saying that no, violence, conjugal violence does not exist in our community. Well, I would say 25 years later, we know that it exists. They offer services in 13 different languages, social services, so that they can reach out to the women who require some kind of support, education, and hope to live a normal life. And contrary to what many people think, domestic violence does not always entail physical assault or injury. It can include different types of violence: psychological, verbal, economic, physical, or sexual, and may appear in the form of more than one type of violence at a time. And even though it is experienced by both sexes, domestic violence mostly affects women, regardless of their culture, social status, or income. And I can say that if you have any doubts about any relationship, if you know of such a situation, you need to contact resources that exists. First of all, 911. We have police officers who are trained to deal with such situations and to evaluate and to give support to the families. But I would say that sadly, the such situations affect children. even if they are not directly experiencing the various forms of violence, most of them at least witness some violence. Exposure to violence is harmful to these children who, no matter what their age, may respond to what they witness in different ways by having crying fits, tantrums, and sometimes they also can retaliate in similar fashions, but thinking that it's normal to yell at somebody because you feel you're above them, or if you want something to take place. I truly appreciate that you have brought all these women together. The international, you're bringing awareness to an existing problem, and seeing all the women who are participating today, we need to continue to work together to help educate all women that they do have rights. They don't have to live in an abusive situation. And I congratulate you for these efforts. By having marches against violence towards women, by having other women who have experienced and have succeeded in getting out of these abusive relationships. Your theme today, Stand Up and Speak Out, is so true. And we can only do that by educating and by helping to support the women. Even if it's not yourself, you see someone, you can tell the way women react sometimes that there's something wrong. Talk to them, try to help them understand that there is a way out, and there are sources, resources that they can apply to, that they can go to get the help for them, for their children, and at all ages. And we've seen the bullying in the schools, we've seen the abusive relationships between husband and wife, but we've also seen the abusive situations by families towards their elders. So I congratulate you for today's conference. Thank you so much for making me part of this and for having us all participate so that we can exchange, share, and continue to support one another in this effort to speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Mary Rose. Thank you so much. Even with your midst of your busy schedule, you make the time for us to take part of this important awareness event. And we congratulate you and thank you. And your 23rd year now that you're going, congratulations. And you're doing amazing job in the community. And I can see that you're doing great job covering all sectors, especially when it comes to women's rights and all that. Thank you so much.
Nandri, wanna come?
Nandri. It's with a great pleasure I would like to introduce our next guest, Ms. Emanuela Lambropoulos. She's born and raised in Ville-Saint-Laurent. Emanuela Lambropoulos has been proudly representing the people of the riding she calls home in House of Commons since she was elected in the 2017 by-election. Throughout her years as an educator, Emanuela became passionate about social change and entered in politics to help make Canada a fairer place for all and advocate for equality, inclusion, diversity. Emanuela would be honored to continue representing her home riding of Ville-Saint-Laurent as October 2019. Let's give a warm welcome to Ms. Emanuela Lambropoulos. Over to you, Ms.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's an old bio that I guess my team sent in. I apologize for that. I wanted to begin by thanking, first of all, the International United Women's Federation for hosting this important discussion today. I think that one of the best ways to raise awareness and to make sure that this is not something that we forget about is by continuing to discuss and talk about it, to raise awareness. Education is key, I believe. In helping solve this very big problem that unfortunately has not gotten better over the years, but in fact, especially due to COVID-19, has actually gotten much worse over the last couple of years, as we can see here and also around the world. I believe that people being confined in their homes has not been very helpful on this specific issue, and more women have had difficult time actually going out of their homes and seeking the help that they would have otherwise had the opportunity to seek. And they're at home with people who are perpetrating the violence towards them. One of the things that's been great is that we've seen that one of the signs that was actually created in Quebec, which is this, is something that's become an international symbol for women to use at their home if ever they're having a conversation on an online chat or anything like that. When they're out and about, they can use this symbol, and if somebody sees them using it, it means that they need help and that they need somebody to reach out for them in order to help them get the help that they need. That's one of the ways that we can continue to help, because many of these women don't see an opportunity to go out and get the help that they need on their own. Polytechnique is coming to 32 years, and I wanted to raise this specific point because ever since I was born, this has been something that was part of Montreal's history. And as early as I could remember, as soon as I learned about Polytechnique shooting, where 14 women were killed at the hands of a man who believed that women did not deserve to go to fields that were male dominated and did not deserve the education that many of these women were acquiring at that time. It's always been the most shocking event in Montreal's history for me, and one of the most difficult ones that I continuously commemorate every year, but one of the ones that touches me the most, and that no matter how many years have gone by, the same emotions are felt by me when this event comes up, because I just can't believe that in a world, especially in a society like Montreal, where we focus so much on equality, where women are represented quite well, actually, especially at the municipal level. This is an issue that, we still have to commemorate every single year. And that has gotten worse over the years, especially when we consider intimate partner violence and violence that happens within our homes. It's something that we shouldn't have to discuss in 2021. It's something that should be a thing of the past, and unfortunately it isn't. As a young woman myself, I know that I'm afraid to go outside of my house at night by myself. I've always felt this fear of leaving my house at night, and I'm sure many of the women on this chat today have felt the same way. And that's just not okay. We live in a free society where we're supposed to feel safe, and we don't, because we're women and because we're not as physically strong as the opposite sex. And because people use that force and that strength against physically weaker people than themselves, we have to feel this fear. And it's very unfortunate. And we have to find a way to break that cycle. We have to find a way to change that. And I think that the best way to do that is through education. Gender stereotypes, making men sometimes feel that they are not able to express their emotions, that they're not able to cry if they feel sad. When they're little boys, we tell them, man up, it's not a big deal. Why are you crying? Boys don't cry. This is one of the key factors, I think, in creating a toxic masculine culture where men are not allowed to express the way that they feel when they're little, and they learn toxic behaviors instead of being able to express themselves in healthy ways that women express themselves. I think that that's one of the key factors involved in gender-based violence. And I think that this is one of the ways that we need to focus on in the future. We need to as was mentioned prior, display the right types of behavior for our children to follow, and so that they can learn appropriate behaviors and appropriate ways of dealing with certain situations. But we also need to educate them in school, because not everybody's home is that perfect safe place where they're learning the right behaviors. We also need to show them at school that this is not normal and that this is the way that we should behave. We need to teach our girls, our young women, what's acceptable in a relationship, what healthy relationships are versus unhealthy ones, how to set boundaries when we're in these types of relationships, because even the smartest women, even the strongest women can find themselves in these situations. And so we need to find a way to nip it in the bud from when kids are young, so that the next generation of women and men don't have to face the same thing that we're facing today. So that's my 2 cents. Thank you for inviting me to this event. I'm really interested in hearing what everyone has to say. Unfortunately, I have 3 events today, but I'm going to stay for as long as I possibly can so that I can hear as many of the speakers as possible, and always happy to be a partner, especially on this issue, which I find is one of the most important issues that we can possibly deal with as women. We need to be here for each other, and we need to be there to stand up for others when we're in a position to be able to do so. So thank you again for hosting this event today, and looking forward to hearing everyone else.
Thank you, Mrs. Manuela. Thank you so much. And it was amazing that you were able to join us even with your busy schedule. I know that you have a 3 meeting that you just mentioned. It's amazing how you brought all the awareness, how we should take this to our future generation, how we should stop by starting now. Right? Thank you so much. I really appreciate your participation. It's with great pleasure I'm going to introduce our next guest, Dr. Radha D'Souza. Dr. Radha D'Souza is a professor of law, development and conflict studies at School of Law, the University of Westminster in the United Kingdom. She is a critical scholar, social justice activist, barrister, and writer from India. Let's give a warm welcome to Dr. Radha D'Souza. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Shubhangi, for that generous introduction. And thank you to Raji and ACCP for your invitation to be here. It's a great pleasure to be here and to actually add my voice to the work that you are doing. Okay, what I want to focus on today is something a little different. I come from India, as Shubhangi has already said, and I have, and most of my area of field of work is South Asia. So in whatever I say today, I come with that South Asian, Indian, and global South perspective. That's my kind of perspective and how I come to this. What I want to focus on today is state violence against women. And I want to focus on this partly because it is the least talked about form of violence against women. If you follow the discourse on violence against women, much of it, a large proportion of it, is concentrated on family and domestic violence, which is, of course, very important. And then to a lesser extent, we have a focus on community violence, by members of the public or communities and so on. And state violence is the least talked about. Now, CEDAW, which came in the 70s, did not even mention state violence. And then we had a whole process, things like the Yugoslavia Commission and various other genocide inquiries, etc., from which the awareness at least grew that we need to at least start talking about state violence against women. And so when the UN Declaration on Elimination of Violence Against Women was passed, it explicitly included state violence as one of the 3 forms of violence against women. So you have family and domestic violence, you have community violence, and then you have state violence. So I thought I should focus on state violence because in South Asia, across South Asia, and across global South, generally speaking, of course, this is a sweeping generalization, state violence against women is the single most terrifying violence, not least because it involves the whole apparatus of the state weighing down against women. And that means, I mean, you can take this, whether it is Kashmir, whether it is Ilam Tamils, whether it is, parts of Rwanda or Africa or anywhere else. This form of violence is something that we haven't really understood and talked about. And generally speaking, I would say that there is a tectonic rift in the international law on elimination of violence against women when it comes to state violence. And there is a north-south rift as well on this. But I'll start with the tectonic rift in the law itself and the international regime for on elimination of violence against women, which is that on the one hand, all the international conventions and declarations and so on require the state to adopt the law and require the state to implement it. And it's very state-centered. And it's the states that sign up to these things. On the other hand, it's those very states that are perpetrators of violence. So those who are supposed to be protectors become perpetrators. So how do we deal with a situation when protectors become perpetrators? So this is the big question. Now, for example, most of the time, there are 3 typologies of state violence against women, which I would like to flag up today. The first is, of course, where security forces and securitization of the state leads to violence against women. For example, deployment of armies, whether it is Kashmir, whether it is Northeast, whether it is, Ilam, whether it is wherever it is. So, and where the state uses the logic of securitization, logic of national security to perpetrate violence against women. And most of the time, those soldiers have total impunity. So they get away with anything. And therefore, there is nothing that you can do legally other than, trying to push for recognition of this form of violence against women. So that is one. The second is class-based violence, which against women, which is again something that we don't talk about, but class-based violence becomes state violence, routinized state violence against poorer, marginalized sections of society. For example, in India, caste violence. So Dalit women, Adivasi women are routinely abused in the police stations. It's everyday violence. So depending in different countries and different contexts, who are the poor, the racialized poor. In the UK, Black and ethnic minority people are generally poor, and there is routinized violence against them. And we haven't yet learned to recognize this form of violence. Adivasi women in India, Dalit women in India, and others in India, it's a regular occurrence. There is a third, in the 3 typologies, a third one, which we have not even, I think, started thinking about. And that is women as political prisoners. The whole discourse around women is that they are disempowered, they are, in a helpless kind of victims of a system. And
Fuck
what
women,
that,
men are better.
I think that must be a intervention from someone.
Yeah, one
Can we-
second, ma'am.
Yeah, sorry
Yeah.
about it. Let's remove all that and
Yes.
sorry for the interruption.
Mm.
This is also a form of violence. Very subtle, but very,
Yeah. I have identified two, and Raji, if you have identified any other, let's lock the meeting room.
Yes. Yes. Now you can continue, ma'am. Sorry
Sorry
about the
about it.
interruption. Yes. Your mic is muted. I will give you co-host. You can able to unmute. Okay, good.
Yeah, I've done that. Yeah. Okay, so I was just coming to the third and the last, and that I will conclude on that, which is that women as political actors are not recognized. But we find that across the global South, and if you look at all the movements in South Asia, women have been at the forefront of movements when there is question of displacement from land, displacement from homeland, displacement. Is that okay to go on?
Raji, I think we should eliminate everyone except the guest. Sorry about it, and we just have to go through this, unfortunately.
Yeah, we removed, but
None.
person came with Kelly, the name.
Yeah, I'm going to remove.
I think we removed, but I don't know how. Yeah, could be done that. Okay, go ahead, please. Sorry, ma'am.
Okay, so yeah, you can see gender-based violence here on the web. But and as I said, the number of political prisoners in Indian prisons today, women political prisoners, I mean, women who are in prison because they have participated in some form of, political movements, demands, whether it is for land, whether it is opposing investors taking over land, whether it is, and now in the farmers' protests and things like that, or trade unions and things like that. And the number of women who are in prison because of this, we have not even counted them. And we have not even recognized them. And we have not even recognized their imprisonment as a form of, violence against women. So I would say when we stand up and speak out, let us look at the realities that are there in the global South today. And I would say that what focusing only on family violence does is it presents women as victims rather than as agents. But if we can speak of family violence and also speak of women political prisoners, then it flags up the fact that women are standing up, women are fighting back for whatever their issues that matter to them. And also, I think women are political actors, social actors, not only for women, but for the whole society. Because when women stand up and speak, they don't only speak for themselves, they speak for the children, they speak for land, they speak for their communities. And that is why I think that women standing up and speaking out amplifies the issues. And that is why the states know this. And states in every big major crisis or armed conflict, whether it is civilian conflict or military conflict, target women because they know by controlling women, they not only abuse women, but they also control men. They control the entire communities and they control the whole society around them. And that is why for armies, targeting women has always been an important issue. It continues to be. And that means it prompts us to recognize that women are agents in society, and their agency has ripple effects across society. So with those three typologies and the need to stand up and speak out against state violence against women, which is a neglected area, I'll just conclude those my observations today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Radha D'Souza, and sorry for the interruptions that happened, and thank you graciously for participating with us and sharing with us different perspective when it comes to violence. And you brought light with the Adivasi and indigenous people, class-rate violence, and thank you so much for that. And with that pleasure, I would like to introduce our next speaker. Sarah Ford is a nonprofit professional who has worked for the past 12 years in both community and international organizations. She currently is an executive director of the West Island Women's Center, Montreal, Quebec, and sits on the board of directors for EduConnects and on the board of the Montreal Council of Women. Let's give a warm welcome to Sarah Ford. Sarah Ford, the floor is yours now.
Thank you very much, and thank you to all for being here and for the invitation to speak. I'm honored about that. Just to give a little context to who I am and who we are a community center based in the West Island of Montreal. It encompasses many boroughs and cities with a wide variety of women coming from various backgrounds and linguistic communities. And the West Island Women's Center has been around since 1975. And the perspective that I'd like to speak to today is a different perspective, because we provide support services for women, not only in the West Island, but across. We provide support services in the context of every age and stage. When you were first a young mother, if you were a retired woman, if you were a working woman, if it's coming from a different angle, is because we look at the idea of supporting women and providing them with a safe space. And it's a very apropos thing to say at this exact moment, because when you're in a space with other women, regardless of your perspective, background, experiences, you are able to learn and you're able to gain some sort of network that you might not have when you are in your daily life. The reason why we are coming from a perspective of support services as opposed to advocacy is because we take part in other organizations that carry the mantle of the advocacy work, and what we try and do is provide the on-the-ground support. And I've had the privilege of working for an international organization where I was able to travel to various communities around the world to work with the patient advocacy organizations. This was in a previous life. And one of the things that I experienced in each of those patient advocacy organizations on the ground were a lot of them were women-led organizations on a shoestring budget that had to be able to determine resourcing and support for their community members. And it was a very, it was an interesting lesson to learn coming into the community here where I live and where I raise my two young daughters. We are not a big organization, but we try and serve as many women as possible to improve their quality of lives. And why this is important is because women are coming through to our services, and sometimes they're in acute need, in a crisis. Sometimes they are in need for education, personal development, or interest in it. But one of the biggest things is for community building. And where this has become quite acute is obviously in the past year and a half, when you take away that personal connection and you see increased isolation of women, our role became very much in terms of trying to connect women in whatever way we could, whether it be online, through interest groups, through discussion groups, through support groups. And we do this now back, as we're trying to get back in person, both through online and in person, because we recognize that there's still segments of women within our community that are not comfortable coming back in person or not able to come back in person. One experience that we noticed is that by offering online groups, we were able to help women that might not have been able to get out of their family situation or home situation, and they were able to have a safe space to be able to connect. This is something that we are going to carry forward past the pandemic, because we recognize that having women come into the center is wonderful for that personal connection and for that community building, but there are more ways that we can reach out and reach out further. One of the things that we do is we do low-cost programming. And why this is important is that we want to make sure the access barrier is as low as possible for women to come and to be able to take courses, to be able to participate in programming. We also offer free outreach programming, and this is extremely important within our community, because we are trying to be able to reach different segments of the population that might not normally have access to government services, either through linguistic barriers, cultural barriers, or financial barriers. These free outreach programs range from mother and child activities to new connections, employment support programming. All of it is done with the intention in mind to be able to provide services where there are gaps in our community. And this is done through various means of looking around and seeing what is being offered in the West Island and beyond, but also speaking with other community organizations on the ground and saying, what are the women in your community looking for and what type of support do they need? It's a challenge because you obviously can't be able to address everything to everyone and be everything to everyone. But I feel like the most important thing that we can continue to do as an organization is this type of preventative support services. Be able to try and be there for women, regardless of where they are in their stage of life, but also in whatever stage they are in terms of their own personal security, their own personal development. And this can range from us going into the high schools to do cyberbullying, adolescent workshops pre-pandemic, and hopefully we'll get back to that soon in terms of back in the schools, to be able to provide a senior women discussion group for women that have been in isolation for the last period of time, but potentially in isolation prior to the pandemic, because the support services within their own family networks are not there. And these types of free-form community building groups have evolved over the past in the north part of the West Island. So when we are looking at the types of programming that we do, we recognize that we might need to be able to provide different types of supports to ensure that women come. One of the things that we had done right from the very beginning was provide free childcare services. The free childcare service is an integral part of our programming, because in a lot of the situations where we have young mothers or women recently arriving to Quebec and to the area of the West Island, that familial support network is not there. So to be able to bring their children into a safe environment and they themselves can then take part in the programming is helping address one of the barriers that we find. Another barrier that we find is in terms of cultural isolation. And cultural isolation is an acute factor for women who are coming from various different parts of the world and arriving in Quebec, where there are other barriers that they're facing in terms of integration within the workforce or within the government services. I've heard it more than a dozen times in the past couple of years that the West Island Women's Center has become a first point of contact. And what sadly has happened over the past year is we've become the first point of contact for women who are in crisis. We ourselves do not provide crisis services, but we are known as at least being a welcoming environment that will be able to connect women elsewhere. It breaks our heart every single time that we are having to see the increased number of outreach calls coming to us. But what we try and do is work with the various other organizations to find out what their processes are and how we can refer women to those services and be there if and when they do receive those services that they can come back in. But I think fundamentally, prevent support services have a role, play a role within the elimination or combating violence, various forms of violence against women, because isolation is the worst part of it all for some of these women, where they do not have anyone to speak to, maybe not even to provide the crisis service, but to even just be there for them. And if we can provide a safe environment for women to come together, regardless of their situations, I believe that we are fulfilling our mission as part of improving the quality of lives of women in our community. One of the things that I want to speak to is the idea of collaboration with other organizations, and I'll end on that. It's so hard when you are a small organization. You're obviously working with other organizations to identify funding, to identify support, to identify how you can work within the community. You don't want to duplicate services because the funding dollars are so small, and you don't want to obviously compete with other organizations for that type of support. But over the last year and a half, it's become very important for myself and also for our board of directors and our staff that we continuously speak with the other organizations. We identify where vulnerable parts of the population are and what we can play a role in terms of providing support. And I'll give an example. We are working, like I mentioned, in the north part in Pierrefonds in providing support services, community building programs for women. We are providing free childcare service at that installation in the north part. A lot of these groups that are providing support for women in more vulnerable populations within the West Island as a whole, but in the north part of the West Island, they do not have that barrier, addressing that barrier of the support. What we are aiming to do is to speak with them and to say, if you are on the ground and speaking with women in challenging situations, can you please communicate to them that we have these services available? And I find that the more we're communicating with other organizations, the more we're working with them, the more tools that they have in their resource kits to be able to reach out to the women that they're serving. So I'll end with the idea that, you know, before the pandemic, for 45 years, here we had worked with the idea that we were a community building organization, that we were bringing women together, we were providing a space for learning, for courses, for, it was a very important role to play. Since the pandemic, it has become quite evident that there are segments of the population that may have not needed acute support before, but due to increased isolation, due to increased security concerns they have within their own familial dynamics, we have a role to play. And I believe this is a role that we should continue to play going forward. If we can be there, at least to be able to be a first point of contact to bring women together, then I feel like that is indeed what we're trying to do to fulfill our mission. A long way to go. And I appreciate having the time to speak today because it allows me to be able to communicate very much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Sarah Ford. Thank you for sharing your amazing works that you're doing in the community level. And I would really like to thank you for the last note that you mentioned, that we have to unite and work with the other organizations in collaboration. And I think I also strongly believe that is the way to combat bigger issues like this, and uniting and collaborating with others and other organizations. Thank you for taking part of this event. And without further ado, I would like to introduce our next guest, Madame Valerie Asselin. Madame Valerie Asselin, attorney involved in federal politics as the Vice President of the National Executive of Conservative Party of Canada, Municipal Council for the City of Dollard-des-Ormeaux, member of the Executive of Montreal Bar, and attorney specialized in family law and youth protection. Madame Asselin was also heard by a special commission on the rights of the child and youth protection as the attorney representing the interests of the mother of the little girl who died in Granby. Madame Asselin speaks out about the systematic problems with youth protection in Quebec on her Facebook page, Our Children First. Wishing all the best, and over to you, ma'am.
In my practice, I often see and represent women victims of conjugal violence. Sarah, I want to thank you for the amazing work you do with these women, first of all, because it's a safe heaven when you're there, and that's so important, your presence. So too often I see women with children that will endure the abuse for years at a level of violence that can lead to dramatic situation like the one that Mary described earlier. And often the violence is done in front of the kids who will also be traumatized. And women hesitate to leave. And I think that it is important to speak out, to report violence, even psychological violence. So there is traceability. But I'll tell you the kind of story I see on a weekly basis. Actually, on my Facebook page, I talk about my stories because I find that it's completely out of this world what I see. It's Twilight Zone, as I call it. So a mom, victim of conjugal violence. Her husband was an alcoholic. He beat her in front of her. Leave him. And she pressed charges. Her husband received an 18-month sentence and he stayed in jail 1 year. The judicial system protected her at that point. 1 year later, once he got out of jail, he called the youth protection services and managed to instrumentalize the system until he got full custody of his daughter. The father is still an alcoholic, but today he has the custody of his 10-year-old daughter, and the mother is supervised in her contacts to her daughter. The system failed this mom and failed this child. And this kind of stories I see every week. So I will join Madame Med de Souza, that earlier spoke about violence of the state, because this is institutional violence that women victim of conjugal violence face on when they denounce violence. Sometimes this is not believed. The system does not believe them, and they end up losing their kids. Mom of 5 kids living in an abusive relationship. She gets the courage to leave her husband with the 5 kids in the middle of the night. And she gets disorganized with the move. She has no money when she leaves. Well, the system gets, took her 5 kids, and the father, the violent father, has the custody of these kids. So the actors of our judicial system do not always understand the cycle of post-conjugal violence. And often a woman that is scared of her violent husband, scared to send her kids to him for a weekend, for example, will be targeted as an alienated mother. And this is a new concept where, you know, I mean, it's I'm not sure if it's new or not, but this is what I'm seeing on my practice, and it's crazy. You see a mom that wants to protect her kids, and the DYP, Director of Youth Protection in Quebec, will say, "Oh, she's alienating. She's an alienating mom." So it is. I represent moms that denounce violence, but after the system turns, have to have more organization, like the West Island Women's Center. We need to be denouncing the violence. I know that I'm one of, I don't think there's another lawyer denouncing what I see and in the youth protection system. And I think that if there were more lawyers denouncing what they see, then the lack of training of our caseworkers when it comes to conjugal violence, when it comes to understanding the post-conjugal violence, there need to be more training. There needs to be training of our judges to understand that when a woman was a victim of violence and a child was a victim of violence because he had witnessed the violence with his mother and his father, we have to, it's possible that this child doesn't want to go to his father on a full-time basis. It's possible that it's not the fault of the mom. So this is the culture that needs to evolve, and there need to be a training, and we need to speak out and make sure that everyone understands violence and conjugal violence. So I'm
Thank you, Valerie. Thank you so much. Thank you for being here, and thank you for bringing a different perspective to this conference. And as you said, the systems and laws and regulations are there to protect us, but it's heartbreaking to see sometimes how the systems let us down. And I really thank you and congratulate you that you keep working tirelessly to eliminate those flaws in the system and giving your voice. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
And I would like to welcome our next guest, Detective Cheryl Jones. Detective Cheryl Jones has been a member of the Toronto Police Service for 21 years. She has spent the majority of her career dedicated to the community she serves, assisting survivors of domestic violence and sex crimes. Detective Jones is currently working in the sex crime unit, where she actively investigates the most sensitive investigations that require the highest confidence. Detective Jones has had direct role in encouraging victims to come forward and has been an integral part in their recovery. She's dedicated to building an amazing support and continues to support for not only their physical safety, but also their emotional safety. Let's give a warm welcome to Detective Cheryl Jones. Over to you, ma'am.
Good morning. Thank you for having me. I'm honored to be part of this discussion here today and to represent the Toronto Police Service. As you mentioned, I have been a police officer for 21 years, and over half of my career, I've been assigned to investigate crimes against women, including domestic violence. And currently I'm in a role as a detective with our sex crimes unit. Unfortunately, my number one call for service throughout my career has been violence against women, which we believe is a preventable crime from the Toronto Police. And we have several goals in trying to combat domestic violence. So we believe in education and enforcement, and obviously holding people accountable and bringing them to justice wherever possible, and thoroughly investigating all of these crimes against women. It's also about enhancing the safety through prompt action, including referrals to our community partners. We've worked hard to establish a lot of amazing relationships with community partners to help ensure that we're delivering a victim-focused response. So again, it's not just evidence collection and offender management, but it's about supporting a victim's well-being. So one of the things I wanted to share here today was an amazing resource that members of the Toronto Police Sex Crimes Unit and other fellow community agencies have put together, is a resource for survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault. And it's called yourchoice.to. And it's a resource that empowers survivors and victims to make an informed decision on how they can move forward after their trauma. So I'd like to share a little video with you all today. Rajiv, can you play that, please?
The Toronto Police Service recognizes that survivors of sexual assault are reluctant to make initial contact with police and report incidents of sexual violence. Our mission is to investigate every case, ensuring personal and community safety, and to provide those impacted by sexual violence with community resources. We are just one agency in a circle of support. We work together in order to provide the best possible outcomes for those impacted by sexual violence. Many people do not know about the options available to them. With that in mind, Project Guide took shape.
Project Guide is a multifaceted community outreach and educational initiative. It focuses on providing resources in a survivor-centered approach that places priority on the emotional and physical well-being of those impacted by sexual violence. To make sure we got it right, we spent 2 years engaged with numerous community service providers and advocacy groups, experts in the fields of health, law, education, accessibility, and technology, and survivors of sexual violence. With financial support from the Ministry of Community Safety and Correctional Services, Toronto Police Service partnered with Ryerson University and MCIS Language Solutions in developing 3 key parts of our Project Guide initiative. An information guide that provides answers to questions most commonly asked by survivors of sexual assault. The guide has been translated into 12 languages, is accessible, and features content that is non-judgmental and inclusive. The yourchoice.to website builds on the content of the guide in an interactive platform that can be accessed on a desktop or mobile device. It has an interactive community resource map, video messages for medical and legal professionals, and links to other critical service providers. The Choice campaign promotes the survivor's right to choose. Through 6 inclusive designs, we are highlighting the survivor's right to find the next step that makes the most sense for them.
Project Guide respects that survivors may choose to seek information from the privacy of their own home or at a local hospital. They may choose to confide in a friend, call the police, or seek out legal advice. Their choice is the right choice. The Toronto Police Service is proud to launch Project Guide.
Thank you. So thank you for that. This is something that I wanted to put out there. It's something that's been hugely successful for our service and empowering survivors to make the right decision if they want to come forward, and just letting them know that they have rights and that they will be supported by not only the police at the time of the crimes reported, but continuously throughout the court process, or if they choose not to go down that road, that they'll be supported emotionally outside of the police service. So thank you. I just wanted to spread that message here today.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Detective Cheryl Jones. Maybe now we can open up for a few questions. Let me see if anyone has any questions.
I could ask her a question related to her field, that what do you think is the key factor in reducing the number of sex crimes we see each year? I think I would like to hear from that area. I hope everyone will do.
I'm sorry, was that question for me, Raji?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. So what do you think the key factor in reducing the number of the sex crimes we see each year?
Well, I believe, as one of my co-hosts said earlier, I think it is education. And it goes back to the way we're raising our children, the way we're talking to our kids about not only our own bodies, how we, our own worth, how we treat others. So that's something that starts from the beginning in the home.
Thank you. Thank you, Detective Shell. I have a question for you. What is the hardest part of your job?
Well, that's very difficult. I think it's seeing the emotional pain. It's amazing to see women come forward, the strength it takes, but obviously to hear the most traumatic things, the unimaginable things that happen against them. So it's being there to support them. And then it's very empowering to me as an investigator and as a police officer to want to hold that person responsible.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you for answering that. And if anyone has any questions.
Yes, I think
go ahead. Go ahead, Ella.
Yeah, I think I can ask the next. What do you think? What is one resource you wish more survivors of sexual assault knew about? Is there any particular resource you think that they are unaware of? And I also wanted to know about, do you come across a lot of what's the rate of Indigenous, cases of violence against Indigenous women? Do you have that as well as a problem?
sorry. Yeah, so resources, definitely just that it doesn't matter the woman's language. We know domestic violence and sexual assault, they affect women across globally, across every religion, every status. So it's knowing that they're going to be supported no matter what their status is. Even if it was their status in Canada, if a woman is here legally, sometimes that will obviously prevent a woman coming forward. That's something we would never ask a woman, and that's not something where we would then not support a woman, regardless of their status. It's the same as, you know, we deal with victims that could be homeless or before the courts, there could have a warrant for their arrest. Women, sex trade workers. So those are all barriers. Women, they don't know that they're going to be believed and they're going to be supported. So I wish that we could get that message out, that it doesn't matter what your personal background is or your situation, you are going to be heard and believed by the Toronto Police and supported. And I'm sorry, the second part to your question was?
Have you seen like what's the rate of cases against Indigenous women if you come across them?
I definitely do come across them in the work I'm doing now. And like I said, I have throughout my entire career, I've met women of all backgrounds. I don't have specific rates or stats to that, but I can tell you, yes, I've dealt with women from every nationality, every culture, every religion. As we know, there are no boundaries with domestic violence, unfortunately. You know, women of all statuses are being impacted by this crime. So yes, I am seeing that.
Yeah, Subhangi, your mic is muted.
Thank you so much for answering that, Cheryl. Thank you.
Next,
And we'll take one more question, and we will close the question session with one more question.
Olga raised her hand.
All right, Olga, go ahead.
Hi, Cheryl. Thank you so much for all the information that you have been sharing with us. I was wondering, what is your viewpoint on the new gesture for help that has been implemented and going viral, and how that can be, like, I mean, what is expected from somebody? Let's say somebody's talking to me and they do the gesture of, I need help. So what will be the next thing that we as citizens can do, as friends or colleagues or coaches, we can do to help this person that is in need of help?
Thank you. So anything that can bring awareness to somebody suffering, somebody going through a violent situation. As we know, victims don't report. They're not always so forthcoming. So if it is a third-party complaint coming in from a friend or even a passerby seeing that symbol, that could be the difference in saving a woman's life. So anything that can bring that survivor to the police so that we can protect them from a violent situation, I would encourage anything. So very frequently I receive third-party complaints on behalf of someone else. Sometimes it's wanted, sometimes it's not. We will immediately begin an investigation. And if a woman chooses not to participate or come forward, it's not like it's just, that's it, we forget about it. We're there to refer them to other agencies. Maybe it's a trust between that complainant and the police. So we want to break down those barriers, that gap. We understand there's cultural issues, why sometimes people don't want to speak to the police. So it's supporting them. If it's not from a police perspective, it's from another support agency.
Thank you, Cheryl, for answering this question. Thank you so much. And we will come to an end with the question and answer session. And without further ado, thank you so much, Cheryl Jones, Detective Cheryl Jones, for being here with us and bringing a different perspective. And you're doing a wonderful job with in this area. And we're wishing you all the best. And we want you to continue to help more women and get success in your career. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's amazing work all you ladies are doing. Thank you.
Okay, let's, without further ado, let's introduce our last but not the least, Dr. Lavanya Sambasivam. Dr. Lavanya Sambasivam is a psychologist practicing in Montreal, Quebec. She obtained her PhD from McGill University and has more than 10 years of training in psychology. Her experiences including working in school boards, hospitals, and private practice. And let's give a warm welcome to Dr. Lavanya Sambasivam. Over to you, Lavanya. Please unmute yourself.
Thank you for having me and allowing me to speak on this important topic. I'm just trying to screen share.
Absolutely, go ahead. And
okay, so I will be speaking about violence against women. My name is Dr. Lavanya Sambasivam. And as noted, I'm a psychologist practicing in Montreal, Quebec. I have worked in school boards, hospitals, and in private practice. So as it has been mentioned, there are different forms of violence against women. I will be speaking about intimate partner violence, or IPV, which is defined as physical, sexual, emotional, or financial abuse between current or former married or common law partners. Sorry. So types of physical abuse include slapping, hitting, kicking. Types of sexual abuse include forced sexual intercourse, sexual coercion. Forms of psychological abuse include insults, belittling, isolating from friends and family. And forms of economic abuse include restricting access to financial resources, employment, or education. So 1 in 3 women worldwide have been subjected to either physical and/or sexual violence in their lifetime. So 1 in 3 women, that is a very big amount. There are a number of risk factors to IPV at the individual level, at the relational level, and at the community level. So if we look at the individual level, there are a number of risk factors to IPV perpetuation. So the research shows that young age, witnessing or experiencing violence as a child, is actually both a risk factor for perpetuation and victimization of violence. And this contributes to the intergenerational cycle of violence, where there's violence from one generation to the next generation. Harmful use of alcohol and drugs is also a risk factor, certain personality disorders, so that we know that people, for example, with antisocial personality disorder, who have a hard time having empathy for others, are at higher risk. Acceptance of violence, or having the belief that it's acceptable for a man to beat his partner, and past history of abusing partner is also a risk factor. There are also a number of risk factors for IPV victimization. So we know that young age, exposure to violence between parents, exposure to other forms of abuse, and marginalized status. So women who live in rural or isolated areas, Indigenous women have higher rates of IPV victimization, immigrant women, and women with certain physical or mental health challenges are also at higher risk. There are also relational factors that increase risk of IPV. So conflict or dissatisfaction in the relationship, male dominance in the family, economic stress. And this is why we know that during COVID-19, this is one of the contributing factors to why there were higher rates of IPV. A man having multiple partners, and disparity in educational attainment, where a woman has higher levels of education than her partner. And then, of course, there are a number of community and societal factors. So in communities and societies where manhood is associated with dominance and aggression, poverty, low social and economic status of women, lack of women's civil rights, including restrictive or inequitable divorce and marriage laws, weak community and legal sanctions for IPV, so there aren't a lot of consequences, social acceptance of violence as a way to resolve conflict, and higher levels of violence in society in general. So what are the consequences of IPV? We know that the more severe the abuse is, the greater its impact on a woman's physical and mental health, and the effects appear to be cumulative. So the more experiences a woman has being abused, the more it impacts her physical health and her mental health. So in terms of consequences, we know that there are direct physical consequences such as bruises, cuts, scarring, and there are also long-term physical and mental health consequences. So physically, women who experience violence are more likely to experience stress-related physical conditions such as irritable bowel syndrome, fibromyalgia, chronic pain syndromes, and exacerbation of asthma. So we're seeing how stress is impacting them physically. We also know that women who experience abuse are more likely to have to abuse alcohol and drugs. In fact, 90% of women with substance abuse problems have experienced abuse in the past. They're also more likely to have eating and sleep issues and to self-harm. So these can be kind of seen from the perspective of women who are experiencing abuse are using, alcohol and drugs, food, self-harm as ways to cope with their emotions. Women who experience abuse are also report lower self-esteem, symptoms of depression, symptoms of anxiety, symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, which is a disorder that develops after experiencing stress where there's a threat to yourself, threat to your safety. And so in women who experience post-traumatic stress disorder often experience flashbacks, have bad dreams about what took place. They may be hypervigilant to their environment. So it's hard to relax. You're always scanning your environment to make sure that it's safe. You may react to cues in your environment that remind you of the abuse that took place. So for example, if you were abused by someone who was wearing a red cap, when seeing a red cap, you might be triggered and reminded of the abuse. And women with post-traumatic stress disorder also report, low self-esteem, high levels of guilt. And we know that experience abuse has also been related to higher suicidal behavior. So it's often, it seems like, okay, so the relationship is so difficult, why not leave? But there are a lot of different barriers to ending abusive relationship. And this is why it's so difficult to end these relationships. So one, there's a fear of retaliation, right? And we know from the research that women that try to leave are at higher risk of being victimized. They're feeling a lack of support from family and friends. So if women feel isolated, they don't have anyone that they could rely on, it makes it more difficult to leave abusive relationships. Hope that things will get better. So often these relationships have periods of ups and downs, right? So there's periods where it's abusive, and then there's a honeymoon stage where things are better. So there's that hope that, okay, maybe things will continue to get better. There's lack of knowledge or access to safety and support. Children, so some women stay because of the children or because they're afraid of custody if they leave. Financial reasons is a big one, feeling like, can I take care of myself? Can I take care of my children if I leave? And then a big one also in certain communities, religious or cultural beliefs and practices that may not support divorce. And there's a stigma to being divorced and leaving relationships, even if they're abusive. So what can I do to help? So if you know someone who is in an abusive relationship, it can be very tricky, right? Because a lot of women in these relationships often feel a lot of guilt, shame about being in this situation. So it's important to be sensitive and respectful and non-judgmental, because what you want really is for them to feel safe enough to open up to you, and you don't want them to feel like they're being judged and to get defensive. So ideally, being there and asking what you can do to help would be great, right? And also abusive partners may be reading their texts, looking through their phone. So it's important to check in and ask if it's a good time to speak. The biggest thing that could be helpful is just providing that emotional support. And when you feel that they're ready, it's empowering them to take the next step, which is, to reach out to a hotline, to reach out to a community center who can assess risk and help them come up with an appropriate safety plan. So thank you. So thank you again for having me and allowing me to speak on this important topic.
Thank you, Lavanya, for sharing your perspective of elimination of violence against women as a psychologist. And you shared many valuable points with us. Thank you so much for that. I really, really appreciate And so we are coming to our end of our session. I would like to thank you all. And also, I want to ask you, sorry about the interruption that we had, but it's an unfortunate, but even though it's an interruption, but in the hindsight, I see that as a positive side is our message is reaching out. It's going out to many people, and a lot of people are aware of this. So when we are doing a good cause, these things are inevitable. And thank you for being patient and being part of us and holding on to that. And without further ado, and Mrs. Ilavarasi Ilangovan, and she's here to give a vote of thanks to all our special guests today. I'd like to say a few words about her. She's our executive administrator of the International United Women Federation. She's a software engineer, social activist, and a writer. I'm welcoming Ms. Ilavarasi Ilangovan. Over to you now.
Yeah, Subhangi Siva, sorry for interrupting. Right now, I think before she give her vote of thanks, we can do some discussion of few questions, and then we can go to the vote of thanks. I think we can do that, please.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I think our speakers are here. So maybe I will start with one question so we can go from there. So we have some time left. Right now we all have seen that interruption, right? There even one voice that we heard that men's are better. We never said men's are not better or something. We didn't blame anyone here. But this, the question that I'm coming with, the solution, how we can find out the solution that we can implement to change men's mindset. So they always have that different mindset. Many, not every men's are like that, but many men's are, they have different mindset. They don't want us to talk about any violations. They don't want to, I don't know how to put this. I think you'll understand my question. We need to come with a solution, to implement, to change their mindset. So anyone, you can jump up and you can share your thoughts here.
Sarah, I think she wants to take it, I guess.
I would not say this is a solution, but it's something that was on my mind at least last year. We had organized a women's forum. It was the first women's forum in the West Island, and we unfortunately had to move it online because we were supposed to do it in person before everything went down. And one of the big discussions was about, safe space for women to come together and discuss. And the purpose of the forum was to highlight issues that were facing women in our community, isolation of senior women, women who are facing challenges of increased anxiety during the pandemic, et cetera. And we had opened this up to general public. You did not obviously have to be a woman to attend this forum. One of the things that was hard about it is that you want to be able to have an open discussion and women to have a space to be able to talk about things that were important to them and concerns that they had being a member of society and or this community. And I don't know how to do that without having an us versus them mentality. But the idea was that it should not just be one space. But what happened today was a perfect example, because there were a bunch of women who were participating in it saying, I don't want to be facing that type of challenge, especially because it was online. When it's in person, you can have a little bit more of control of a situation. So I wouldn't say it's a solution, but I would say it's definitely important that we still increase the discussion with men part of that discussion. It's not going to change things, but maybe at the end of the day, they might hear and become more aware of some of the things that we're talking about, and being more comfortable to be able to say those things for women that might have the privilege of not being in that crisis situation. So like I said, I don't think it's a solution, but it is something that we had a discussion as an organization about at that point in time.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Anyone else? Professor Radha, would you like to contribute something?
Unmute yourself.
Yeah, I could actually respond to that, because I used to work for a ethnic women's support network, which we had, conversations like this. And one of the things we found very effective was to get men to come and speak about family violence, domestic violence, about arranged marriages, which is again in ethnic minority communities, a very sensitive subject. And men who were in violent relationships and had reformed or changed or, had come to a better space, if you like. And we found men coming out and speaking very, very effective. Men coming out and speaking to men about why they should not, why they should get out of the cycle of violence. That has been a very effective strategy.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That's a really valuable point that you brought up. And Cheryl, Lavanya, Olka is here, so you can come up.
If you have any questions, you can bring. And Olga, yeah, you have a question, go for it.
Well, more than a question, I have two things. One, to contribute to Raji's point, the question, and I think that is, we as women and mothers, some of us, have a responsibility to start working with our boys. I only have boys that I'm raising, and it's my responsibility to make them understand and see the value of another human being, and how it doesn't matter the gender or the race, it's just another human being and has to be treated with love, respect, and humility. So I think that is the values that we work in our home are translated into society. So it's not about what else can other people do about it, it's what do we do for ourselves? So how is my self-esteem and self-worth, so I don't allow these things to happen to me, or at least so I can actually speak up and say, sorry, that's not the way you talk to me. That's not the way that you're supposed to be addressing me. So that's one. And then teaching our sons how they should be treating themselves and the respect that they should be treating others. So I think that that's one of those things that we should be starting to work with them since they are born. So it's not to wait for them to be men and then to show them all the way around. So that's only my little bit of contribution, Raji, to your question. And I was just wondering when Lavanya, you were talking about these aggressions, and I was thinking that we talk about abuse in terms of physical violence, so things that are visible most of the time. And I was wondering how do microaggressions are contributing to these cycles that don't break. So they might not insult you directly, but they might give you points that make you feel bad, right? So I don't know how much awareness we are bringing about the microaggressions into our society and ourselves to see the level of toleration of violence that way. So I was wondering if any of you guys have experience or has an idea on how we are making people aware that microaggressions are as difficult and as bad as physical aggressions or verbal aggressions that are very out loud.
Thank you. I would like to share my points. I totally agree with Olka, definitely. Nothing is impossible, even though I believe this, but changing the men, as Raji said, changing their mindset is a bit difficult as from my experience. So we can start the changes from the born. We have to teach the values, we have to teach the gender equality, we have to teach the kids, we have to grow the kids. I believe in that only. We cannot change the grown man mindset or grown man behavior. It's, I think, even though I believe nothing is impossible, on this aspect, I thought it's impossible. So let it be. We can seek for help for these kind of abuses or insecurity, but for the future generations, we can stop this by growing our younger one to be teach the values of the gender equality. It's irrespective of men, women, girl, pink, blue, nothing else. It's the equal. Everybody has an equal feeling, equal pain, equal rights. So this is the one of the solution in the future. It's not easy for tomorrow. It may be possible in 2 decades or 3 decades. So I believe, I totally agree with Olga. And also the other point is absolutely 100% accept. Mostly everybody is focusing on the physical violence, not the mental violence. abuse words or something they said make them feel inferior or make them feel down, that's never ever counted as an abuse. Even though in the developed countries, I feel the same, Olga. We have to make the awareness. It's equal. It's not physical, mental awareness. The kind of words we say which hurt the other person is more powerful than the physical abuse. Physical abuse may go in some after getting the treatment, after taking the rest, after taking the medicine, it will go off. We may have the scares, but in the mental hurtings, it will remain the whole life of the person. We know the child who abused in their younger age, the rest of the life will be very how can I say, it's a very hurtful. So we should make the definitely we have to make the awareness on those kind of mental abuses. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to sharing my thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you, Lavarsi. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And Lavanya, please go ahead. Next, we can give chance to Cheryl to share her thoughts as well. Go ahead, Lavanya. Thank you.
No, I just wanted to say I totally agree. I think it starts from a young age, right, with those beliefs about gender roles, that women have equal rights to men. So it starts very early. And as I was saying in my presentation, so that would be, I think, the ideal way, right? And then there are also relational and community factors. So we know that kids who grow up in an environment where there is abuse tend to then be more likely to become abusers themselves, right? So also working with that relationship, if both partners are willing to, that could be another way that we could reduce the rates. And then the other way is at the community level, right? Where awareness, speaking about why violence is not okay, finding ways for men to better regulate their emotions so that they're not resorting to violence, being able to express their emotions without using physical means. So there are, at the individual level, at the relational level, and then at the community level, there could be interventions at those different levels that could be effective. And then so like you were saying, Olga, yeah, for sure. I think that emotional abuse is not, spoken about as much, although it is more common, right? And there's a tendency to kind of dismiss it because, it's not as, direct, and the impact isn't as obvious as the physical abuse is. But of course, there is that impact, and therefore it is very important to speak about it, to have that awareness, to teach our young girls and boys about what emotional abuse is, and being able to identify the signs of it is also very important.
Thank you, Lavanya, for your sharing and answering that question. And maybe Detective Cheryl Jones, would you like to share?
Sure. As I spoke about earlier, and as many of the ladies here today have said, it does start in the home. And also from a community aspect, as the police, we're outreaching. We have numerous officers that are very reflective of our community that we serve. We have almost 200 different cultures and languages in our city. And so we have officers reflective of those communities, and we're reaching out to those communities and leveraging on them to, we're educating those members and getting them to leverage to their communities within their churches and communities so that they understand our laws and our views on gender equality and domestic violence. And that way they can help to educate within their communities and encourage victims to come forward and be supported by the police. So again, it's breaking down those barriers so we can reach within our community. So that's some of the ways the Toronto Police Service is trying to reach the community, to encourage people to come forward and to stop that violence.
Thank you. Thank you for your input with that matter. And if anyone has any other questions, and Raji, you have any questions?
Yeah, I think we could talk about maybe little bit about, as everyone here shared, and we all know that's very important to the women, they have to come out and seek help, those who are in that abuse situation. But in Canada, like, I don't talk about other countries, but in Canada, we have that facilities. We have shelter or even police, and every area we could see that we can go and get help. But unfortunately, women do not want to come out and seek help. How we can, address this situation? Okay.
Does anyone like to take this question?
Sarah, I'd like to go first. Yeah.
I'll speak to sort of what the discussions happen on our end as a community organization. There's the taboos that, or the that this is not happening to me situation sometimes. And when you're positioning a program, there has to be a lot of thought behind that program. It's not just all of a sudden there's an issue and we put together a program and we put a name to it and we're going to get people flocking to it. We have to have this continual evaluation about how the message is getting out, who it's getting to. And this is where I go back to working with other community organizations, because there's also a trust factor there. Just because we're known as a community organization that supports women doesn't mean necessarily that women are going to feel comfortable or trust that they can come into this space and it's safe. So I feel like that's another reason why it's very important to work with credible organizations that are on the ground serving more vulnerable populations. And I'm sure Cheryl must know that as well too, from a government services perspective as well. Even names of program. Like we were debating and discussing a name of a program and we were like, okay, it's going to be a support program. Well, maybe some women are not saying I need support. So how do we position that program? We're talking about a women's discussion group. We're talking about a conversation group. It's ways to get women into the program where they're not feeling like they have to self-define themselves because they might not be at that space yet. And especially when you're talking about preventative support systems, you're not wanting to put a label on things. You're wanting to get people into the door so that they're comfortable. And at that point in time, maybe they feel empowered to be able to go out. And maybe those discussion groups might lead them to another more type of crisis support system. And maybe it allows them to come back later on when they're in need of a rebuilding support. So that's an experience that we've been debating and discussing on our end of things about how do we position and how do we communicate and how do we gain trust and build reputation so that we are welcoming spaces for women to come to us.
Thank you. Thank you, Sarah. That's really well said. As Radha, would you like to contribute something as you unmute?
Yeah, I will. Yeah, I just thought I'd add something to this because we work with ethnic minority women. And one of the problems we face, I mean, like most of the time we talk about service provision as a generic kind of thing. These are the services that women need, whether it's counseling, whether it is shelter, whether it is whatever. But I think with the women who have come from refugee, asylum seeker backgrounds, there is a whole history, behind why they are here as refugees or asylum seekers. I mean, I'm not just talking of status issues, but they have gone through, wars at home. They have gone through military, experiences with army occupations, various other things, sometimes genocide situation, and they come to a country for asylum and refuge. And most people don't understand those problems. So it's not simply about, giving shelter from a man who is beating her, but it is about understanding a complex of relationships. And very often, even the domestic violence is very related to what happened at home. Because, if you have been, persecuted by armed forces, if you have been persecuted by, vigilante groups because of your ethnicity, because of your nationality, both of them suffer. So women very often do sympathize with their husbands because of what they have been through, torture, all those kind of things. But so they don't want to, leave and go, but at the same time, they can't stay in that situation. And they feel that outside, if they go, people don't understand that world. that they have left behind. That's why I wanted to focus on state violence. And it's a subject that we have not talked about because it's very complex. It's not about, okay, you're not in India, you're not in Sri Lanka, you're not in Kashmir, you have come to England. So, here are the services. It's not just as simple as that. Because that kind of trauma which they bring with them, and the domestic violence is a result of that, we have to start unpacking that trauma that happens at home. And that is why we have not paid much attention to that. Many women who come are very active in their own home countries, in various struggles, in various movements. They come here and they become nobodies. And people just see them as, okay, this is a woman who is a victim of domestic violence. But they're much more than that. So I'll just stop there.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Dr. D'Souza, for your input. That's valuable points that you have mentioned there. It's absolutely true what you're saying. So without further ado, I think we are coming to our end of the session. Thanks again for everyone to be patient and participate in this event. And again, I'm going to welcome Mrs. Ilavarasi Lagovan. Over to you, Ilavarasi.
Greetings to our most valuable invited guests and all the attendees throughout the world. I feel honored and privileged to have the opportunity to present the vote of thanks on this special day. The International Day for the Elimination of the Violence Against Women will be initiated on 25th November. The date also marks the start of the 16 days activism that will end up to Human Rights Day on December 10. This conference reminds us that the violence against women is one of the most widespread human rights abuses almost in all the countries. Individuals, organizations, and institutions across the world are being called on to organize the special event during this period in a bid to put an end to the violence against women. This is the one of the unforgettable day in the history of our organization. Today, we have hosted the most important awareness conference in Canada with the 8 wonderful delegates and the most valued participants. I also like to thank all the honorable delegates who blessed us with their presence. Thank you so much for all the speakers here for sharing their precious knowledge with us. On behalf of the International United Women Federations, I convey my regards and hearty thanks to our honorable guest, Member of Parliament, Ms. Emanuela Limpropoulos, Member of the House of the Commons, Canada. In her speech, where she mentioned education is the key to prevent the violence against women, she also proposed the solution to stop violence by gender equality, growing the girls stronger, wiser, and to teach them how to set boundaries. That is, the way she explained the topic is extraordinary. Thank you so much, madam. I should mention the deep meaning of the appreciation for Mrs. Dori DeRose, City Councillor, Park Extension District, in her explanation for seeking the help. Speak out. She mentioned the importance of speak out, seeking the help. When something goes wrong, we should speak out. I appreciate for her great information shared with us. I would like to express our sincere thanks to Dr. Radha D'Souza, Professor of Law, the University of Westminster in the United Kingdom, for giving the excellent coverage to the unknown area, state violence against women. In her speech, every day we are hearing the news, especially on the South Asian countries, the abuses against young girls, women, every day it's happened. Thank you so much, madam, to bring this unknown area, state violence against women on this conference. I would like to express my gratitude to Mrs. Sarah Ford, Executive Director, West Island Center, Women's Center, for providing biggest encouragement and support to the community, especially the child care programs for the purpose of educating the women. Thank you so much. I also very grateful to Mrs. Valerie Aslin, advocate, SOS Advocate Incorporation, City Councillor, for analyzing the failure of laws. Personally, I come across many situations. We have to bring out the loopholes in the law to give the chance to abuse the women, especially the moms, immigrant moms. Thank you so much for bringing this awareness in our conference. And also, we would like to acknowledge our gratitude to the Detective Cheryl Jones, Sex Crime Unit, for exposing her theory of always stand with the victim side. There is always help will be there. And also playing the extraordinary awareness video in and also propose solutions and answers for all the asked questions. Thank you so much. I personally like how Lavanya Sambasivam highlight the IPV and all the solutions that can be implemented to avoid the violence against women. It's really intelligent and thankful for the wonderful presentations. I personally liked Mrs. Elaine Alam, Development and Public Policy Ambassador, International Unite Women Federation, Pakistan. In her speech, where she mentioned about the indigenous minority violence, women's violence, especially in South Asian countries. It's a very much important point to come across. So we are all inspired by your great thoughts and words. And also, this is the time to thank all our media supporters, Elathai TV, Samuham, Tamerika TV, Vanakkam Malaysia, STS Tamil TV, Tamil MTV, Tamil America TV, Penicia TV, TamilInayam.com, Tamiloli, Patti, Udaham, TRG, Nan, Mantamil, EC24 New, Vanakkam America, iTamil TV, Krishna Live Telecast, Thiravuhol Media. Mrs. Raji Patterson and Mrs. Subhangi Jiva, and ladies and gentlemen, once again, I would like to say that we all are most grateful to all the speakers on this forum. We thank you for bringing with us this morning. It's a great pleasure. Thank you so much. I would also like to thank the organizing team, technical support, members, and attendees. I should not forget to thank the volunteers and our teams who put their last complete week into arranging this conference. Without you guys, this event is not possible. Thank you so much for all the delicate guests and attendees. Merci beaucoup. Vanakkam. Nandri.
Thank you, everyone. And let's end the session. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much. And also, sorry for the interrupt. You all understand that is, we cannot control some stuff, something like that. So I really appreciate your understanding. And yeah, thank you so much again.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you all.
Recording stopped.